Students, this is a brief video on what to look for in the sample student paper. I certainly wanted you all to study up on the rubric and critique the sample student paper yourselves. And now we can compare perspectives, right? So you've critiqued it. Now let me show you kind of how I view the paper. And I will emphasize again that this is a good example. I think Bob makes this writing process look easy because he's done a really good job synthesizing and comparing the sources. So just know that it takes time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of thought as you're working on your project. So beginning first with the rubric, remember that you can have a very nice paper, but if it doesn't hit these requirements, it's not going to earn a high grade. So one of the key things here that we've emphasized throughout this summer session is the 8 scholarly sources. That's really important. We've built toward that. Again, you had 6 that were graded, but you need 8 total. One key thing that we'll also see in the A range for working with sources is that you need to define your terms clearly as you go. And I encourage you to use definitions from the scholarly literature, not the Merriam-Webster or any other online sources. It's not the issue that it's online. The issue would be that it's not defined precisely for communication scholarship purposes. You need to not cherry pick quotes that don't make a lot of sense. You need to purposely select quotes from the research that connects to your topic. And you need to, in the second part, explain them well. So put these sources in your own words, show that you understand what a quote means. These are challenging sources to read, so you might need to read and reread certain paragraphs or passages to really gain the gist of what the author or authors are saying. I have to do that myself even after 15 plus years studying this discipline. So the key piece that differentiates the literature review from an annotated bibliography is putting these sources in dialogue. So that's a phrase that I've used throughout the summer session and in the written assignment materials. That means you're comparing and contrasting the sources. And just a rule of thumb is that you should have at least 2 different sources cited per paragraph. As we turn to organization and arrangement, the way I put this is that you need a funnel pattern. It goes from broad to more specific. So you want to set up kind of an overview of your topic in the beginning and then go down to more minute details as you proceed through the paper. Use transitions, and I want them to be ideally at the start of each paragraph to show why you put the paragraphs in that order. Each paragraph should be internally cohesive. And definitely stick to this rule of thumb, no more than half to 2/3 of a page per paragraph. And when I say cohesive, that means that you haven't just tossed a couple of different sources in the same paragraph, because I said put at least 2 in there, but that this paragraph actually covers a small focused theme or topic. So each paragraph should really be cohesive. Right, the paper properly cites at least 8 scholarly sources. I've really tried to give guidance and help along the way with this, but you'll have to refer to Purdue OWL, which is the online source I've been talking about, to know how to cite sources properly. So make sure if I've given you corrections or told you a source needs more information, that you've actually done that, because it is frustrating for me to give my time and to help with that, but the changes aren't actually made. So keep that in mind, and when you're doing at least 4 of the scholarly sources from communication publications, if you got them through the Communication and Mass Media Complete database, it is a communication publication. So if you're doing only Google Scholar, you might not know if a journal is part of the communication discipline or not. So go through the databases to be sure for at least 4 of your sources. And I am looking for, just make sure you have Times New Roman 12-point font, 1-inch margins. The paper should be 5 to 6 full double-spaced pages long. So if you have 4 pages and then a couple of sentences on the 5th page, that's not 5 full pages. And it's not that I'm counting pages or concerned specifically with the word count, but you really can't fully address a topic in less than 5 pages. So that's the rationale for that 5 to 6 page range. All right, so we've got that in mind. Let's go to Bobby's paper. You start with the revision letter, and that's also listed in the assignment. Let me know if you have any questions on that. But what you're doing is after we have peer review and professor conferences next week, you need to be taking notes on what has to be fixed or improved in your paper. This is something that scholars do all the time. We have to write these revision letters ourselves when we're trying to publish our work. So Bob's revision letter is not super detailed because honestly, he didn't have a lot to do. He came in with a really good rough draft. Do not feel bad if your rough draft isn't in amazing shape. But one thing I will tell you about is that students from spring 2018, the area that they most often fell short in the revision letter was that they didn't provide enough specific detail. So some would say, I added a new source, I did that, I did X, Y, or Z, but they didn't clarify what source they added or what they actually changed. So you note that Bobby had to break up the paragraph into 2 paragraphs, and he clarified here what the 2 new topics were. So give detail. You don't have to tell me about every comma you missed or typo you fixed. Certainly don't worry about that. But all of the big picture stuff, the really heavy revisions that change the quality of your paper, do note those. I went through a couple of things in Bob's paper and highlighted them just to remind myself to talk about them with you all. This first part, when he noted that movie violence went through a rough U shape, that doesn't make any sense, right? I think I know what he's talking about, but it makes sense when in the next sentence he clarifies what this is. Rosie, do you want to say hi to my students?
Hi.
Okay, Rosie's here while I'm working today. Another key piece that Bob excelled in is that he defined desensitization and other key terms as he went. So again, he's not using a dictionary definition because that would be different than how communication scholars use it. He's got a great solid definition here. As we scroll down, we can see that he's got really good examples of putting related sources in dialogue. So he's got Sparks et al. And then Green and Kritchmar, and they're both from 2005, and they're talking about similar ideas. It's about sensation seeking. It's about this stimulus that violent content provides. Now, as we scroll down, this is a paragraph that's kind of in a weird spot. It was important for Bob to cover the rating systems because those are designed to protect children from violent content. And because we have a rating system, that acknowledges potential harms or dangers for children and potentially even young adults who are exposed to media violence. So although this paragraph is in somewhat of a weird spot, it's kind of an abrupt inclusion, Bob does really well at the end explaining essentially why he needed to include this paragraph. So you'll see at the end, the youth is much more malleable at a young age and are at a bigger risk to the process of imitation of violent media content. So then we have a sense next that he is going to be talking about some of the concerns about youth and mediated violence. Right? He defines this term graphicness, right? What exactly does that mean? How is it being judged or assessed? And then he has some information about how youth are actually impacted, right? So maybe it doesn't cause you to act violently, but it might encourage more aggressive behaviors, right? To be aggressive in different ways. Maybe it's bullying, maybe it's name calling, things like that. Right? And he mentioned desensitization at the beginning. He's picking that thread back up again, right? And he is talking about desensitization as a key impact, potentially, of violent media content. And I like this piece from Funk et al., this quote that I've highlighted here. Basically, it's telling us how is desensitization measured. So we know what it is because Bob has defined it, but how are studies really assessing that? And I think that's an important piece that he brings in. I like that he also put this finding in dialogue with previous findings he's discussed from Sparks et al., right? So you want to be weaving those ideas together to present a full picture of your topic, right? And then he has a fairly typical conclusion. You will summarize what your paper covered. I will say, again, this is a great paper, but almost everyone tries to end their literature review is saying like, this is something that's here to stay. So try to be more innovative. You might be too tired with the paper to be innovative at this time, but again, just push yourself a little bit to summarize and explain the impact of these studies and these findings that you've covered. All right, I hope this helps. As with all the videos, let me know if y'all have any questions.